Everybody always says, look at past behavior to indicate future performance, like interviewing. We interview on strength-based. I don't look at what someone's done 10 years ago, because in the industry we are working in, something you've done 10 years ago it is not relevant, right, to a certain extent. Of course, if you went to a good university and you went to good companies, it should have clearly gives me an indication that you've done something well. But when you interview with us, it's a reset button, because I want to look at your strength and what are you going to bring us going forward. Just because you've done something in the past, are you still going to be hands-on going forward?
Alex, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you for having me.
How was the lovely, rainy UK weather?
I think there's always a nice reality check when you're in England that you're expecting the summer, but it never really comes, but it goes very quickly.
How long have you been in there? You're used to it, though, I'm sure, by now.
I've been in the UK now for over 25 years, on and off.
Wow. And you haven't picked up any of the UK accent or anything?
I try to keep the German accent when I can, although my wife, who's from Hertfordshire,
oh, really?
Yeah, my wife's English, tries very hard to Englishise my English.
No, stay how you are. Stay how you are. Before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about your background and the journey to where we are now.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Chris. So Alex Nicolaus, as you probably can tell, German accent. That's because I was born in Germany, but I was brought up in France, where I spent all of my childhood and my schooling. Which is why I always joke around in my football odds at any competition between Germany, France,
good odds,
and England. So good odds.
So you choose whatever's working best. You're like, okay.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got 3 different flags. I got 3 different shirts. But deep down, German. But grew up in France, where all my family still lives.
You still don't have. So you don't have a French accent whatsoever either.
No, that disappeared quite quickly.
Okay.
Because I went to an English school in France.
Oh, I see.
So that's where I think the whole confusion comes. And I'm not a linguist. It's just I happen to have picked up the 3 languages because I was sort of living and breathing.
And you speak all of them fluently?
Well, I think if you spoke to a French person, they wouldn't say I'm fluent. And the same for my wife, who says he's not English.
To me, you'll be fluent, yeah.
So grew up in France. My whole family still lived there. But I went to an English school, which then led me to study in the UK. Ended up at Reading University. And from there on, a couple of things happened. I met my now wife very early on. It's actually our wedding anniversary today.
Oh, congrats.
18 years. She forgot. So I just want to put that on record.
Oh, my God. Listen. I've never said this on air, but you've just opened up. Me and Natasha, both of us forgot our 20-year anniversary. And the only reason we found out is Natasha's aunt did a post on Facebook and tagged us in saying congratulations. And we both just looked at each other and I was like, oh my God, I'm glad we both forgot, because that could have been a disaster.
Well, I think 2 things. Well, after 15 years, I think you're allowed to forget.
I feel like it's a long time.
But there's also 2 dates. There's, I think, the civil ceremony, and then there's the wedding itself. So I always remember the civil ceremony, which is today, which then always prompts my wife to then remember, no, of course, I will, give you a card in 4 days' time when it's the wedding. So, it's a little joke that goes on for us. But yeah, I met Nikki very early on, just after university, when I started working in the city. And because she works for the Foreign Office, that sort of started our journey in a lot of different countries around the world. Before I went into consulting, and then with big corporates, and then with startups. So that's sort of the very high level, but I can go into
But where was the intersection of your journey in HR?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think that came much later on. When you leave university, you try to be as useful as possible. So you end up, going into professions, either a graduate scheme, or you go where there is, research, because that's what you really learn at university. You learn how to look at data, analyze it, and then come up with reports, right? So I started really becoming a researcher within consultancy firms. And that I did in London, and then I did it in China for a couple of years. But I think the underlining theme there was I always wanted to be around people. And I think doing pure research or analytics or being just around finance and numbers is something I was quite good at, but not excelled in. And it wasn't something I was enjoying. So this is where then I decided really to take down the path of becoming a search consultant. And that's where I spent my first part of my career doing executive search, because I really enjoyed the interaction with candidates. And also there was a lot of selling. And deep down,
some of the best salespeople I know, that's why they started. It's like
I like, at the end you sell something. I was selling a job, and now I sell an organization. So I think that the love with people and the interest with that came from the beginning of just following some ideas around where am I best at and what do I enjoy, which I think is a piece of advice I would give anyone when they start their career. But the consultancy, you have to make a choice. And if you want to become a partner, it goes very much down to bigger sales, and you need to commit to a location. And I think you need to commit to an industry and a sector. And you need to do that over 20 years, and then you become partner, and then you're quite...
Yeah.
I'm not saying I would have made that, but that's the career choice you had to do then. And because I grew up in lots of different countries, lots of different languages, we were living in China. For me, that was too linear. And I always felt like I wanted to maybe go to the client side. So actually one of the clients we were working with said, hey, why don't you come in-house? So that's where my in-house career started, with Willis, and then with Barclays, and then with Jaguar Land Rover in China, and finishing off with Accenture in Singapore. So there's a good stint of 8 years with big corporates doing international roles, but all in-house. So I was just taking my skill set from a search consultant in-house, saving the money, but also for me to get more sort of interested in, okay, what's HR? And there's more than just hiring. Clearly, there's the whole portfolio of roles within that. And then once I ended up at Accenture, I had a bit of an allergic reaction. Not to the company itself, because I think all of these big consultancy have a place in the world.
Yeah.
But for me, again, the other cross point came again between, do I want to continue this and then end up maybe a global head of TA, because that was the end point you would get to, or do I try to go wider and figure out total rewards, performance, development, analytics, tech stack within HR, employer branding, ATS systems? Because if I did that, perhaps I could move into like a CPO role. Mm-hmm. But it would have taken me much too long to make that career change, after 15 years of working, if I wanted to stay in the corporate world. So this is why I said, okay, I'll do 180, not 360, just 180, completely different direction. And that's when I joined Grab in Singapore. And similar to yourself, they started in an industrial estate a little bit, where they had all their offices, because it wasn't so much about the outside; it was what was happening inside, which is so important, right? Yeah. Because there's a lot of times where individuals look too much at what looks good from the outside, but forget what's really important, right? And I think that was the first lesson I learned with Grab, is it wasn't so much the brand, wearing suits. It was the individuals themselves.
100%.
Both co-founders from Harvard. They could have worked anywhere, but they saw a niche in the market, a problem that needed to be solved. And if they can do it, surely, I can also join them. And I think what they convinced me with is that, you can really choose the pace at which you want to grow your career. And if you want to learn all the different sort of elements of, HR, it's really up to you.
Yeah, you don't have to wait 5 years. That's your point. Or because if you did that in a corporate setting, traditional large corporate, it would have taken you so long, right?
Correct.
Whereas in a startup, you're straight in the deep end, and you're managing all of those things.
Exactly.
Straight away. And that's kind of what happened to me when I started our business. I'm like, I am CFO, I am IT, I am marketing, I am sales. And all of a sudden, what would probably taken many careers or many, to obtain that information, you kind of learn the hard way. You jump out of the airplane and build your parachute on the way down.
Correct.
Which is, and also it's so exciting. It's hard, but it's so motivating, exciting to do that.
And I think if you put the exciting before the hard, it works, right? Because it is hard.
It's not easy, yeah.
But if you don't like it and it's not something you want to do, and it goes against your grain, then you're not going to enjoy it. And you want to appreciate the startup experience. Whereas for me, I was ready to do that. And now being at Paysend, which is my third startup, I'm no looking back. I don't regret the decision of having left the corporate side of things and moved into, now my third startup. But at the time it was at Grab. You really did pick up some of the areas of the portfolio. Then Circle's Life called Circles now, hired me my first head of people and culture role. So again, another progression. And then Paysend hired me as the chief people officer. But it was all sort of a progression, but it happened over 10 years, which would have taken me, I think, 25 years.
Probably.
Had I done it elsewhere. I'm probably not qualified to be a CHRO for a big...
But what is qualified, though? They can get into a whole new conversation.
Yeah,
it isn't certifications, I can tell you that.
Qualified from an from an outside in, right?
Yeah.
I might feel like I could probably, take on those challenges, right? But from an outside in, there's probably certain career tracks you have to do to become CHRO, right? Whereas, chief people officer is again a different terminology, I think, which applies probably more to startups or to, Series A to Series C.
But it's now being adopted, though, by a larger...
It has, actually, right? So that's
and that lean methodology, they're basically taking a lot of the learnings and lessons from startup into large corporate in order to move quickly, be more agile, etc. I wanted to touch on the multicultural background. Like, how has that shaped your worldview and your how you approach the role of CPO?
So I think if you want to become a CPO, if you want to work in HR, I think your ability to connect with other human beings, in person or through, online channels, the ability to have the understanding of what they want to say, so the listening, the empathy to really understand what they're looking for in the workplace. I think you get that by being exposed to a lot of different scenarios, and having been in China, having grown up in Europe, having covered the US and Latin America, Africa not so much, but Asia for over 10 years, I think you got a much better understanding of the questions to ask in order to get the right information, because everybody looks at it differently. And also I think the listening part is really important, because the more you're able to listen and really understand what they want from work, from their role, from their career, I think the better you can shape advice, and I think the better you can design the organization that you're working for, and make sure that the individuals you hire and want to retain and develop thrive in that environment. But if you don't have that understanding, or you don't have the skill set to ask the right questions, or to understand what they want in order to be their best at work, makes it harder. It's not impossible, but makes it harder. So I think having been exposed to so many different ways of working, different cultures, different religions even, I think that put me in good stead, to at least ask the right questions and to listen properly.
Yeah. Is there, because a lot of leaders I speak to, when they first jump into a role, they go on that sort of listening tour globally. Is there, and many of them tell me there's no way to shortcut this. It takes time to listen, build trust with leaders, make sure you show up on site, whether it's a manufacturing site, or I literally spoke to Sutra the other day. I'm in the middle of a mine, because she went down into the mine to really understand what is the work that those workers do in the mine, as well, to truly connect. What advice would you give to HR leaders on how to practically go about doing what you're describing?
So I think it's probably a two-prong approach. One, clearly there needs to be time in person, but I think you should not underestimate the capability of the world we're in, and using the digital tools available, right? Whether it's video recordings, whether it's Slack, whether it's monthly town halls or weekly interaction, I think both have to run in parallel, because the reality of travel and going to places is an opportunity cost of executing work, right? So I think you need to figure out where your time is best spent, where your biggest hubs are, where perhaps the biggest conflicts or the biggest issues are, and you start there first, right? I think if I went to a new organization, I wouldn't go to the area where everything works well, because for that, I can do that. I can do that later, right? And I can use a different types of communication for those individuals, but I would go there where I think there's the biggest sort of challenge or the biggest rebuild. So I think you got to be quite careful in how you organize yourself. 100% of just going to places, you'll become the individual who is never in one place, because I think especially in our world of startups, execution and delivering and still being hands-on is very important. And I think that speaks louder than how many visits you do.
Did that shock you? Because I speak to many CPOs, they weren't fully prepared for how hands-on they need to be. And in the weeds.
No, that's why I was surprised by the question. No, absolutely not. It's actually what I preach. For me,
because you went from that large corporate, because many of them, I spoke to the CHRO recently from a 40,000 plus employee company and went straight to a startup, and she quit after 3 months. And I said, you know what happened, right? And she's like, I just didn't realize the amount of work, because she's so used to having a big team of teams that now she's doing payroll and she's doing hiring and she's doing everything. And I don't think I think a lot of leaders I speak to, they're not quite prepared to go. Then they've got the founders dynamics. There's a whole other thing, right, to deal with.
So yeah, I'll break it up in
Sorry, I know it's threw it out of nowhere.
No, two responses, right? The dynamic with founders, which is very different than working for a corporate line manager or CEO, and also the amount of work. I think when you move into a leadership position within a startup, you become a servant leader, which means that the team doesn't work for you, you work for them. And it's your ability to get them to be motivated, for them to solve their own problems. Because if you try to do everybody's role, it's not going to work. No. So clearly there is a phase at the beginning, first 3 months, first 6 months, wherever you go, I think you got to be all in, 110%, right, to set yourself up. And that comes in different flavors. But I think over time, it's about your ability to have your team to be so motivated, right, to know what they need to do without you asking them to do it, that you then become the problem solver for them, right? And you work for them. So I spend all of my time really solving challenges and problems, not just for my team, but for everyone in the organization. I might be the chief people officer at Paysend, but equally I'm part of the exco, and I work across all dimensions of the organization, whether it's finance, whether it's marketing, whether it's engineering, whether it's risk and compliance, because as a leadership team and other organization, we're there to make Paysend successful. So you get involved in everything. Mm-hmm. And again, it's about helping others, to solve their own problems, not to do it for them. And I think if you can't do that, and then by design, it's very difficult. And then I can see you will burn out because you don't have big teams. Yeah. We have around 350 people at Paysend. We've committed that we will never be over 500, and we're in line to achieve 1 billion revenue in 4 years' time. So we want to get to $1 billion revenue with 500 people.
Wow. And why?
Because by design...
That's what everyone's going to be asking right now.
Because by design, it forces you to think much harder about who you keep and who you hire. We only have 150 more headcounts available.
It changes the whole view.
It totally
changes
does.
Everything, actually.
So we want to get to, we look at revenue per headcount, not how much they have to generate like a salesperson, but we want to look at, with 500 people, we want to yield 1 billion in revenue. Those 350 people we have now, there will be replacements over time, right? Because as the company grows, people might not be able to, keep up, which is okay, but we're there to help nevertheless. But everybody knows this is how much headcount we have left. So everyone you hire, please make sure that they're a bar raiser.
That changes the whole conversation, doesn't it?
It does.
When you have that as the...
Because it allows you, when you bring new individuals in, we adopt the Amazon concept, a bar raiser, right? So anyone who joins Paysend needs to be at least better than the average of the team. And we have a similar process, but we have the Paysend way. We do it a little bit differently. But the whole idea is everyone new that joins, everyone who's in the business needs to be excited by that person joining. Because how do we learn? I'm not a big believer on learning and development tools, and we can come to that, and AI. For me, you learn through the new individuals who come in, right, who really have a new perspective and who are going to raise the level at what we operate in. You learn much better from people than you learn from systems, right? Processes is just the way of doing business.
The best lessons I've ever learned was, for example, in sales, was sitting next to the best salespeople.
Of course.
And shadowing, mirroring them, having conversations with them. That was better than any sales training that I ever got.
Of course. And if you want to do a 4x revenue growth in 4 years' time, in the multipliers we're looking at and the hundreds of millions, you can only get there if you hire the best from the best, right? But then, so let's say we achieve that, right? There will naturally be people who won't be able to keep up. So as much as we look at hiring bar raisers, we also manage low performance. And we're quite open with that. So if any individual doesn't hit the minimum expectations, we try to help them to get back on track. But it's an open program that we have, and we've now come to a point where people even accept to talk about the times where there might have been under expectation.
Really?
Yeah, and they go into our monthly town.
How have you created that psychological safety in the workplace when you have that approach?
Because we told them, like, we are a people-first organization, but we can't just keep individuals in the business who are not at least achieving minimum performance, right? So by design, you need to give them regular feedback. So we have by design lots of ways so an individual knows whether they're meeting expectations, and if they're not, we put them on
like weekly one-to-ones. Like, what does that look like?
So weekly one-to-ones is BAU, right? But I think on a monthly and quarterly basis, we have reviews where individuals know where they stand, right? Through their line managers giving them feedback. It's not the official PDR. Performance development review that happens twice a year, but we have sort of mid review checks where individuals get nudges in terms of, look, you need to recalibrate here because you are falling perhaps below minimum expectations. But that's okay, because we have plenty of examples where, and we don't judge why someone it might be personal reasons, it might be the wrong role, or you've been in the position for too long, right? But let's ascertain, is it because your skill level has dropped and we need to help you with that? Is it a behavior thing? Let's also help you with that, right? And I think Paysenders know that, and I think they're okay with it. Not all improvement plans lead to individuals staying. Some of them, exit. But we talk openly about it. I think being really authentic about your culture is important.
And it sounds like, I can only imagine you're also talking about this during the interview process, so people know what they're signing up for.
Interview process every month during the town halls. It's a message.
Part of the culture.
It is part of the culture. It's how we designed it, and it gets delivered by myself and my colleagues, right? But it's in a way that's not. We're not trying to use the improvement plan to exit individuals like other organizations might, because they don't want to pay out, certain redundancy plans. For us, it's a genuine approach, whereas we're very clear in terms of the growth that we want to achieve. We're very transparent that, we want to make sure that we want to bring in the best individuals to join, and everybody within the organization needs to at least meet minimum expectations. So you could say there's 10% who don't meet expectations, and then there's 10% who are the new hires, and there's everybody in between. So a lot of time is spent with all the solid performers, all the ones who, the 80% in the middle, so that we can then focus on real coaching and invest some money on that. But
whereas in most companies, they actually do the opposite, right? So you have high performers and they're like, actually, let's spend money trying to get all of these people up to the performance we want. And you're like, no, actually double down and invest. And again, that's just part of the message that the clear message that you're sharing internally. But that, in order to be performance first and people first at the same time, there's a challenge there, obviously, right? Because it's all. So I'm assuming you and the team must have to be very clear on the KPIs.
Yes, we're very
super clear, because in order to have for this to work, people have to have really clear metrics about what does good look like.
Totally.
Across every single role.
Yes. Yeah. It took us like nearly 5 years. I joined in 2020. It's been similar to yourself, a journey over 8 years. For us, it's been a journey over 5 years by design, step by step. We built it this way, but we're very clear on the OKRs. So we use OKRs as our methodology. We have 5 company OKRs. We have our, financial targets. These are shared on a monthly basis. Everybody knows exactly where we are, and everybody knows how their work impacts one of the 5 OKRs.
Okay.
We don't have OKRs in all of the teams, because I feel that methodology is too stringent to have it in all the lower sort of levels. So we have OKRs from a Exco level and N-1, but below that, everybody can use their own ways of measuring success in their teams.
Do you empower the managers?
Totally.
Okay.
We totally empower the managers. But at some level, we report back to the board and our investors, we need to have these OKRs, and they're very clear, and we don't deviate from them. These are our 5, and these are the 5 we're doing this year, right? And I think by spending more time upstream...
Can you share some of them?
They're down to some of our consumer business targets, some of our enterprise targets, some of our people targets, how we want to grow the network. So they're quite industry...
Combination.
Yeah, they're combination, quite industry specific, overlaid with some financial targets as well. And then we have our, PXE has, people and culture have their own sort of, own metric, but it doesn't have to be put down to the key 5, because otherwise there's too many, right?
Yeah.
But deep down, and when we just had our latest engagement survey in, I think 90% plus of Paysenders know exactly what their role is in the organization, right? And it makes it much easier, because then you can really, when something doesn't go according to plan, you can really focus your time on that 10% and leave the 90% alone, which also allows us to do flexible working.
Yeah, that's another thing you mentioned when we first met. It allows you to have that flexible way of working. Is there, I can imagine as someone in my previous company, I used to get quite frustrated when the company, how do I say this in a nice way? I would be frustrated as a high performer that we would hold on to a lot of low performers for years. And I would be like, why is this person still here? Like, in the nicest way possible. It could be a lovely person, but it used to demotivate me because I want to surround myself with, to your point, with someone who's going to help elevate me, that I can learn from and like bounce off. Is there a sense within the culture amongst employees that they're part of something special because of that we're holding ourselves accountable?
Of course, and that's why we've decided to only be 500 ever. Because people know this is an exclusive organization to be in. Right? At the moment, there's only 350 of us. To come and join Paysend is hard because we want people who are better than the ones we have already.
I'd love to be part of your interview process.
And so there is a pride and an excitement to be at Paysend. Engagement levels are really high. Our attrition is low. You don't need to be in the thousands to achieve the financial metrics that we're achieving. You need so many people when you don't have a design on how to get the best out of people. But if you have 350 people who are the best at what they do and you've got the right org design and they're firing in all cylinders, trust me, you can get amazing results, right? If you have 3 times that number, I have so much more work because the more people you have in your business, the more issues you will have. It's the degree of separation, right? If you're on your own, you know at some point how much 100% you can do. There's 2 of you with your business partner, you know how much the 2 of you can do. But once you get over to the hundreds, you lose track of the yield that everybody can get, right? So I think that's why the design and the process needs to be there to help you. So for us, everything is engineered in order to get the best out of that. And I'm not a believer to tell individuals to work from 9 to 5. Now, who am I to say, Chris, please start at 9. You might have kids, you might want to do a run. I much prefer you to come in at 10:30, feel you've done the exercise you needed to do, and then do your the amount of hours you need. If you can only do 6 hours, you need to get home again to do some family life, then you'll have no problem joining a call at 9 p.m. And even if your wife or your partner will be fine for you to join that call because you've done other things, right? But if you try to have a work-life balance, it means you're trying to equal something out.
Need a blend.
We need a blend, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
But the blend can only come if you truly enjoy the mission you're on.
I mean, I was up till 3 a.m. last night, and people were like, "That's crazy." Well, I was like so excited because I'm building a new a Wellbeing program that I'm working on, which I've been so excited to build. And like most people would be like, "That's crazy." I'm like, I didn't even know it was 3 a.m. because I was so in the work. I was so excited to do that. And don't get me wrong, I came in today at 10:30 because I needed some rest from that.
Of course.
But I'm not going to limit myself. And I say this to Shane early on because when we first started the company, we put those guardrails on ourselves. We carried those traditional ways into a startup because I've been working that way for 10 years. And I remember saying to the team, just because you're here 9 to 5 doesn't mean you're actually doing work, right? It doesn't mean that you're adding value. Like just because you're in the office, that doesn't equal outcome. Like, so I was like, so, and then they're like, and I remember like everyone looking at me with blank face, like, what are you talking about? And I was like, we're not paying people to turn up. And just because you're here early and you leave late doesn't mean you actually added value to the business.
No, your value is added by delivering your OKRs.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And like in the past, it was you were valued for turning up to a location, which is kind of like I can imagine when my daughter's older, Robin, she's 6 now. I'm sure she would say, "So wait a minute, Daddy. People used to travel in 9 to 5 every week, every day, like Monday to Friday, into an office to do work. It will be foreign to the next generation. That's how we used to do things because it was carried over from the Industrial Revolution."
I agree. But I think we shouldn't lose some track on having some human interaction, right? It just needs to be...
I want that, but it's to be intentional though.
Correct. It needs to be intentional. It definitely needs to be. And so we still have the FOMO events. So rather than trying to ask people to come into the office, we make sure that we organize things in the office so that people come themselves. Yeah. And they realize that, human interaction like we're having, that's why I wanted to come into the studio today, is so much better if you can than online. Clearly online has lots of benefits, right? But utilize those benefits, right? So if you're going to be online and working from home, maybe that's time when you do more reflection, more thinking work. Yeah. Whereas if you come into the office, try to do it, when I go into our London hub, it's not to sit down in an office and do my calls, right? It's to speak to everybody there. right? And utilize sort of my skill set of listening to people, how they are, how they feel, right? But I don't have to do that every day. If I do it once a week, that's plenty, right? And if I do it in all the different offices, that's plenty, right? And then I just complement that with the online follow-ups on that, right? But you got to figure out how you work differently depending on the channel that you use, right? Yeah. And I think that mix is very powerful.
Yeah, I love the fact we just went down this rabbit hole, by the way.
Yep.
We didn't have any of these questions planned, but this is great. This is exactly why this this interaction is important.
Agree.
Tell us about the book. When what was the inspiration behind the book? What inspired the startup culture?
The book is my own little startup project, because it was an argument I had with my wife.
Of course, that's how a lot of good things start.
Yeah. Although we didn't meet on an argument, but hey, the point was, when we were living in Asia, I kept complaining that in any airport bookshop that I went, I could never find a book on startups or culture. And my wife always goes, yeah, of course, no one wants to read that. It's boring. She's the opposite. She's a civil servant, right? She doesn't understand the world that I work in, but she knows it makes me happy. So, all
happy
good
for you.
So I said, but look, I could write a book. And she goes, you would never write a book. You can't write a book. You'll never publish it. So, that's like a
challenge.
That was a challenge. So that was January 2020, and it was published in November 2020. So it took me less than a year to publish the book, write it, edit it. And
did you self-publish or did you publish with?
Self-publish, because at the time it was COVID, and also I think with self-publish,
which is even more of a challenge because you had to learn everything about how you self-publish, which is a whole nother.
Which I guess is to my earlier point around it was my own startup project, because once you figured out the why, the how is easy, because I knew that I wanted a book. One, to prove my wife wrong, but secondly, in parallel, we had already decided that we wanted to return to the UK, having been in China and Singapore for over 10 years.
Yeah.
And I didn't just want a CV, because I felt just sending a CV, having not been in the UK for 10 years, would get diluted big time. So if I can come up with a book...
That's a genius idea.
...and send it to VCs, PEs, founders...
That's amazing,
I can tell them, hey, not only do I have a CV, but this is my playbook on why I think culture is important. And the little story behind it is that our current co-founder read the book.
No way. So it worked.
And it did work, and hired me at the back of it.
Wow. So there you go, everyone.
So it got published in November 2020, and I started in Paysend in December 2020.
Who's it for?
So it was actually for founders.
Founders.
In order to really make them understand and believe that if they invest in culture early on, it has a huge advantage later on, rather than trying to retrofit, because it tends to be called HR, right? And it tends to be more a
administrative compliance,
a little bit, and reactive.
Early on.
Let's get funding right. Let's get the marketing. Let's get compliance. And then let's do. But then I think if you do that later on, too many behaviors have already happened. The culture happens.
Also, you got some bad hires.
Well, or good hires, bad hires, things have already happened, but not by design. So sometimes you get lucky and it just works. Yeah. But I think if you want to have a method behind it and a design, it's much better to think about it early on. And our co-founder had that idea. He really wanted to invest in culture and people early on. So it really resonated with him. So they had just closed Series A. We were about to close Series B. And I was actually one of the first sort of ExCo members to join. And we've built the culture design, or our playbook, before really we had our CPO and chief product officer, finance, marketing. That all came afterwards, right? So I think that was a key distinguisher why I think Paysend is doing quite well now, because it's 5 years in the making. So it was for founders. It was also for investors, because at the time I felt maybe I can do more of an advisory type role coming back to the UK. So utilizing the book to maybe be a fractional HR leader. But I didn't even have time, because within 4 weeks of publishing, I was already working for Paysend out of Singapore.
Within 4 weeks?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, I got it to the right people. I got some early copies out to headhunters as well. So I sent it out to key headhunters.
That's such an interesting way of doing it, by the way.
And I think, and it's fine, I'm not offended. I think most people haven't read the book. Right? And it's a little bit of a secret there, right? I think just by going through the effort of writing the book.
They took the call.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course they'd take the
call.
My
podcast kind of does the same thing for me. Like, people just take my calls because they see the podcast. And I'm like, have you even listened to it? A lot of times they just...
I don't think they have.
They just take the call. No, 100%. Because I always say how I've done thousands of these calls. I'm like, what was your thoughts on the podcast?
And
I can tell they know of it and they see the following and they see everything, but they don't.
And the funny thing is, sometimes I do interview candidates for Paysend, and they go, "Oh, I loved your book, Alex. I read it." And I go, "No, you haven't."
What did you love about it? I made that mistake one time where I went to an interview and they asked me, what's your favorite book, and I just said some book, and they were like, "What was the main takeaway?" And I was like, "Oh God." I hadn't read it, and I made.
But I'm not offended. My mum probably bought most of the copies anyway, so that's fine.
What's the key, for the HR audience listening right now? What are some of the things that you share in the book that you think really will resonate with them that they could use within their organizations?
So I think try to think more about behaviors than values. So Paysend has been based and built on behaviors, not values. Because values in a global distributed workforce can mean many different things to many different people from different industries. If I take a value of integrity, it would mean something very different to an investment banker in the US versus maybe someone in Asia, right?
Yes.
Because integrity means different things. Behaviors, if you are very clear about them, are things you can hire against, which we do. So, a lot of our hiring process is based on behaviors that we would like to see in individuals, because we have 7 culture principles at Paysend, which are behavior based, and we use them in all of our decision making.
So you link those cultural principles directly to behaviors.
It's all based on behaviors.
And then you map that out in the interview process.
Yes.
Interesting.
Because behaviors you can assess against, behaviors you can give feedback against, and behaviors you can develop. I can't develop your value of something. It's very subjective. But a behavior I can build on. Like we have a behavior of ownership. That's not really a value. I mean, maybe some people call it a value, but we have
I love that one, by the way.
Ownership, and it's a very clear behavior.
Like entrepreneurial.
Totally. And we have all our job descriptions, all our job architecture. Every role within the organization at different levels. We mapped out what ownership means at that level. It means something different when you're a customer service agent to someone who is a Paysend leader. Clearly, but
that goes back to your point though. Everything you're saying is like further making me understand what my role is in the bigger picture in the organization. What the role and value do I bring?
And if you want to progress within Paysend, clearly it's on impact and performance, but that's only 50% of your PDR. The other 50% is based on your behaviors.
How do you? I wish I could. I have to talk to you offline about something.
because we feel
that's quite a grey area though. So how do you measure against that part?
Behavior.
Yeah,
it's very clear. Like we map them all out, so it's very clear the kind of behavior that we want to see at different levels, and you get assessed.
But how do you assess for that though? Is it through like doing a 360 of that person's team?
Yes.
Like what's the way?
So one-on-one, like line manager and individuals. Then we collect 360 as well. But behaviors are tangible. You can really give examples on that. Right? If it's just value.
How are you documenting that?
Through we have our own sort of proprietary system in terms of how we collect that.
Okay, but I'm just throwing questions at you right now.
No, but
we're interested.
No, because we share, but we overemphasize these culture principles, and they've been with us for the last 4 years. So it doesn't happen overnight, right? But they're everywhere in terms of how we make decisions. They are on our Slack channels on how we thank people and having showed these culture principles. They are based against some of our decision on some of the objectives that we want to work on, right? We're high in integrity, right? We're high in achievers. We are, customer first. Some of them might overlap with values, but for us, they're very clear. They're behaviors. Because only on behaviors can you give someone a real example. Look, that project you've done.
Yeah.
You said there was an issue with it. Yeah, I agree, but really you should have dealt with that. That's not the level of ownership we want, for your role. If you want to become a Paysend leader, for example, if you see a problem like that, you need to take ownership of it and close it. It's like, okay, I understand, right? So individuals really understand how they could progress because of their behaviors. It's also from a hiring point of view, it's very important. From an upstream sort of selection point of view, and we only want to hire individuals to join Paysend when they know about the kind of behaviors that we enjoy working with. Because if you don't, we're not going to change. And that's okay. So Paysend is not for everyone. I think it's an amazing organization that's extremely welcoming, but it's also a high performance.
Yeah.
So it's divided into
for everyone. You're right.
High performance culture. Culture as the people, it's the mindset, it's the behavior, it's values to a certain extent. High performance is the productivity and the profitability. You put the two together, we assess that with behaviors.
Do you, as part of this is, and I've seen it in other companies that operate in a similar way, you have the approach of, radical candor.
Yeah. We
in order to be able to
So I love all of these terminologies, you know, the
There's
why.
other ways of saying
No,
it.
the why, the how, you know, the what from Simon, and then, you know, the practical candor and so forth. We just try to package it a bit differently. Because I think if, but they all mean the same thing. So obviously, or not feedback, but feed forward. It's the same idea, right? So we're just changing our performance and development review to be more feed forward. Because I think if you meet expectations, then let's not spend too much time about the things you've done in the past, good or bad, right? I mean, we probably thanked you enough for the things you've done well, but let's just look at how can we double down on the things you're doing well. I think if you
Why is that so important, by the way? Because everyone still focuses on feedback. Why is that so important?
Because why look backwards? And everybody always says, look at past behavior to indicate future performance, like interviewing. We interview on strength-based. You know, I don't look at what someone's done 10 years ago, because in the industry we are working in, something you've done 10 years ago is not relevant, right? To a certain extent. If you had, of course, if you went to a good university and you went to good companies, it should have clearly gives me an indication that, you know, you've done something well. But when you interview with us, it's a reset button, because I want to look at your strength and what are you going to bring us going forward. Just because you've done something in the past, are you still going to be hands-on going forward? Because we have, to your earlier point, we have a lot of 20 plus year experience corporate finance profiles who want to work in the fintech, because it's the cool thing to do.
It's the new, yeah.
But do you know how much hard work it is? You're going to go back 15 years in terms of the kind of work.
Relearn everything.
Yeah, unlearn to relearn.
Unlearning is really, in my experience, more difficult than like I found in the past. It's like easier to hire someone who just has a growth mindset and to learn than to have someone unlearn something is way harder.
It's harder, but it's very satisfying, because you don't, just because if you unlearn doesn't mean you're unlearning what you know. You're just being open-minded.
Yeah, the word unlearn is not probably the best word either.
But in that context, right? Yeah. To unlearn, to relearn, it's just you got to be open to individuals doing something a little bit differently. But we do want some of your input, right? We do want someone to have an opinion, but not to be stubborn about it.
Takes humility.
It does, and I think the ego is definitely hit in a small organization, because there's not many of us, right? And we have very good people working for us, at all levels, and there's no room for that, right? We're all part of the same mission, right? Which makes it quite unique.
How do you avoid burnout in such a high-paced environment?
So I think,
personally,
from a company perspective, it's really important to show progress. You know, I think you can't just expect individuals to work really hard for 12 months and then do the big reveal at the end, we've hit our targets. I think you need consistently, weekly and in monthly and quarterly, show everybody the efforts, what they have yielded, right? In all aspects, because that's really important. Because if you leave it for too long, it's very hard to be self-motivated. I mean, some of us maybe at the more senior level, because we have equity in the business, you know, we're like Duracell bunnies, you know, we're motivated all the time, right? Because we see the bigger picture. But you want to motivate everyone because it's infectious. But for that, I think you need to be able to showcase your progress in terms of some of the commitments we've made, number one. Number two, you need to get together socially. You got to make it fun and enjoyable, right? Like we get together whenever we can on the monthly basis after the town halls, but by purpose. One good social get-together once a month beats all the little infrequent, you know, half-hearted get-togethers during a week just because people come to the office every time. And you also have more to talk about. You're actually really excited to see your colleagues who you see on the screen. So we make more of an event on a monthly basis rather than a lot of them, you know, get together on a weekly basis. Although if you're in the hub, we call it a hub, not an office. And there's
I like that, because you're coming together as a hub, right?
Correct. We really move away from a lot of the stigma terminologies. That's why we call it flexible working, not hybrid or remote. Because flexible remote working, we give our own definition of what that means.
As soon as you say one of the others, it kind of puts it in a box.
Yeah, office
immediately.
Office. No, it's not work. It's a mission, right? It's not an office. It's a hub, right? It's by design. We're very
careful. The word
careful.
Office now just needs a rebrand, right? It's like as soon as you say office, it just.
But it does, because we don't force people to come into the office. We have guidelines that it would be good for them to come in for various reasons, to meet in teams. But that's why it's a hub. It's a place to collaborate, to meet your like-minded colleagues who are all there trying to do the same thing as you, trying to grow the organization. So I think, make sure you show them progress and make them part of the bigger picture. You got to, being at Paysend needs to be high-performing, needs to be enjoyable, right? And I think you need to see that you're progressing as well. So I think the third point would be, sure, there's burnout perhaps, and it's hard work, but if you're progressing, it's important to do a retrospective. So it's not so much about feedback. So I think when you give individual feed-forward advice in terms of how to get better, that's one thing. But it's always good to do a retrospective and to see how far you've come. And when you look
I'm terrible at that. I need to get better at celebrating and looking back, because otherwise you don't appreciate it.
No, and that's what frustrates me sometimes is that everybody always says, I want to learn more, I want to have more impact, I want to learn. But why don't you just look at the last things you've done in the last 12 months? We've actually paid you for that learning. You actually, it's much better to come to us than doing a degree in business, because what you've done in the last 12 months, I promise you, would have been a better learning than if you invested it in
be in debt.
You'd be in debt to begin with, and we pay you for the learning, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
So sometimes, when people do leave Paysend, we sort of say they graduate from Paysend.
I like that. Again, yeah, it just puts a different emphasis. And do you have many boomerang?
Not too many.
I was just wondering, because of the nature of how you're structuring everything.
So we had a few. They haven't really worked out. I guess once you move on.
I know. I kind of get that feeling.
I'm not against it, but we've had a few. It hasn't really worked out for whatever reason. Yeah. But we hadn't too many. But we do celebrate people moving on. Honestly. There's a 4-year cycle in a startup, right? Just linked to the equity you get, right? So it's if you do at least 4 years, you do the.
Does everyone joining get equity?
Used to. Mm-hmm. So I made sure that when I joined, when we were at the beginning, to over-index on equity, because ownership. Well, because ownership is not just a behavior; it's it is a behavior, but it needs to be behavior in terms of how you make decisions as well. So if you want to be a company that gives ownership, then why don't we give equity to everyone? So that was a big disalignment with external stakeholders as well. But in the last 4 years, most individuals at Paysend got equity, because I think if you are early hundreds, it's great to incentivize everyone. Of course, there comes a point you can't keep diluting.
Of course.
Right? So it's getting a little bit harder now. So certain levels now still get equity if they get hired.
On a level, yeah.
But the others based on performance. So we still have some equity available, but it's based on performance, not just given out.
Why I'm not surprised it's based on performance.
Well, because, it's getting the equity now when the valuation is higher is worth more, obviously. Mm-hmm. And I think when you start off, I think we should learn a bit from our US counterparts that if you want to safeguard your salaries a little bit, it's good to be able to composite your total rewards package with equity.
Yeah.
Which is not the norm here so much in the UK.
Isn't it?
Right?
No.
But that's because also there's a lack of education in terms of what the equity actually means, how it vests and what it can give. People in the US know, but there's also more success stories of companies either getting bought or
like Nvidia,
or doing a secondary round, or doing IPOs.
Like every single employee in Nvidia became a millionaire.
Well, look at Revolut. I mean, they even gave
Revolut.
Yeah, that's a great example. But there aren't enough examples for people then to really appreciate that the equity is worth more than cash. But it's only worth more if you stick at it, right?
And it's a great motivator.
But for that you need to educate your employees in terms of the performance, what the share price is, how much it's growing, right? You don't want to keep it in a secret black box, because if they can't value it, then they'll go back to the usual, I want a bit more base salary, I want a bonus, I want better benefits.
I could talk to you forever. We've already gone for an hour. We didn't even get through half the questions, but I'm glad that we went down this rabbit hole. And I'm super fascinated by it. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you really want to talk about that we should have, that we missed?
I think there's just one question you asked in terms of burnout. And then just from a personal perspective, and I think that's perhaps an advice, not an advice, but maybe I can just say what I do, and maybe it might help individuals listening. But I think really important to have something outside of, I wouldn't even call it work, but the main mission that you're on, and to have time for yourself to a certain extent. So I do a lot of running. It combines mindfulness and also activities to a certain extent, but having a hobby or something that's truly yours, I think is really important. I mean, clearly there's family time, and that takes a big priority, and making time for that. Then you have the mission that you're working on that takes a certain amount of time. But I think having something for yourself is also not to be neglected. And then there comes the whole aspect of health. So I think if you combine a hobby that also has a health aspect, I see yourself, you have an Aura ring.
It's my wedding ring.
It's your wedding ring. It looks like an Aura ring. Okay, you got a Garmin. Okay.
Yeah, I've got my Garmin.
So I think there's a lot of things you can wear that can give you those indicators.
Every morning I'm like, how much sleep did I have? What's my health score?
So we help Paysenders with that. So we invite a lot of external guests.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, we've had some really cool individuals. We had Kenton Cool, who climbed Everest 18 times.
Wow.
He came and spoke to us because that was linked to how do you get motivated every year to climb Everest, and he physically does it. And the startup is the same idea. So rather than giving advice or telling Paysenders what to do, because I can't tell them what to do outside work.
Inspire them.
I can inspire. I can storytell. I can show them examples. We had fighter pilots come and talk to us. We had astronauts come and talk to us. So we really invested time in getting individuals. We had a sleep expert come and talk to us recently who was
I want to be part of this. I love this stuff.
And because of those stories,
you need to bring in Andrew Huberman next.
Yeah.
Bring him in. That'll be good.
So that helps. So make time for yourself, because as a leader of the organization, you're the one who has to wake up every morning, be excited about the mission. I come into the office on calls. I'm always excited. I'm always full of energy, but it doesn't happen because it just happens, right? Yeah. You work hard at it. You work at your sleep. You make sure you're healthy, and I think that makes a difference because then you energize everybody else. But that's the role of the leader. I think it would be my final message of a servant leader within a startup. You got to bring everybody up with you. Right?
In like 30 seconds, for anyone watching who wants to be part of that 500, what message would you give to them?
Well, first of all, have a look at our website at Paysend. Have a look at being, a challenger who's just celebrated the 8-year anniversary. We've got 10 million customers. We're 100 million plus revenue organization. We're cash EBITDA positive, and we're doing that with 350 people. And a little secret is that there's only 5 people in people and culture, including myself.
Really?
So everything that I've just mentioned in
plus
terms
the
of
book.
Plus the book, but all the hiring we do every year, we don't use any agency. Everything is done in-house.
I'm not surprised given everything you just shared.
There's only 2 of us that do the hiring, myself and one other person.
So you've hired every single
person in-house. We use agencies for some confidential roles.
What company was it? Was it like Amazon? The first 500 were like hired. I can't remember what startup it was. I think it was maybe Amazon. Like the first, was it Oracle? I think it was Workday. The first 500 people were hired by the CEO.
So I interview most of I would say I interview everyone at some point in the stage. I don't always do the final interview, but we it's more than 30 seconds. But I think this just shows an example that you don't have to be a big team. I used to have much bigger teams, but if you have the right people in your team, the yield you can get, and then we could go down the utilization of tech systems and AI that definitely has its place. But we can deliver a high-performance organization that delivers the financial metrics that I just talked about. Having an engaged organization of 350 people with just 5 people in PXE. So maybe not the best message, because if
you're going to be getting some messages on LinkedIn after this, I think.
But I think it takes time. Like, I understand that there is legacy ways of working, which makes it hard. The great advantage we had is that we built it in a way that works, right? So I understand it's not, you can't just retrofit from 50 people back down to 10, right? It's difficult, I understand, but it's just an example to show that if you design it in a certain way, you can get a huge yield in terms of the output.
Yeah. And last thing, where can people find you if they want to connect you personally or grab a copy of the book?
Startupculture.co.uk for the book. I try to keep it up to date, but I don't have too much time to be on social media. Otherwise, LinkedIn, you can always message me there.
Startup-culture?
Sorry, yeah. Startup-culture.co.uk.
Just making sure.
Yeah, I'm not the best self-promoter. And then LinkedIn, of course, I'm not as active as I used to be, just because it's a full-time and I'm not looking to go anywhere. So I think, but I like using LinkedIn just to connect and see what individuals are doing. So yeah, please connect with me on LinkedIn as well.
And everyone listening, as always, wherever you're listening or watching, those links will be below anyway to make things easier. But thanks so much for coming. It was good to see you. And I'm super excited to hear everyone's feedback from the podcast. And there's so many great takeaways, and I appreciate you coming on.
Cool. Thank you. Cheers.